Hello and welcome to Noted. I'm Lakshmi Karthanet with Nasser Al-Harasi, and today our guest is Dr. Eric Hopkins, and he has just finished his PhD at Sultan Qaboos University, and it's a very interesting subject that he's been studying for the last 4 years, and that is this wonderful tree. They have two species in Oman. They have fruits, and they're called Būt and Hegimt or Hegimt. So actually, when we go up in the mountains, in Jabal Shams or Jabal Akhtar, for me personally, it was in Wakhan, when we came across these fruits, purple-colored fruits. And yes, this tastes and feels like they're supposed to be good for you. But he has more information because he's been really researching on this. Dr. Eric Hopkins, welcome to Noted. Welcome to Oman Observer.
Thank you.
So could you tell us why you just chose this topic to study and these particular trees?
Well, Oman has quite a few enigmatic plant species, very interesting variety of flora that grows throughout the Sultanate. And a lot of my studies have been based on agriculture and horticulture crops. And this is another one of those interesting ones, because if fruits in the summertime, when it's hot and drier, and it's interesting that in all these other times where many other plants aren't doing so well, it is producing wonderful fruit in areas that it can. So it's a very interesting fruit plant. And here in Oman, like you said, there are two different morphotypes that are produced here, two different fruiting types. And one is associated with North Africa, and one is associated with Southwest Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, like this. So they both converge in Oman. And according to the literature, it's the only place known for both of them to coexist.
Really? So this is the only place where you can see, and you have some pictures where they're together.
Yes, they grow amongst each other. Absolutely. Here in Oman, only they grow next to each other.
Okay. That's amazing. Maybe there's some sort of support system they have, but in your backdrop, it is the Western Hajr Mountains we're looking at, isn't it?
Yes.
And so these trees are found here, and you had a certain area for your study work.
Yeah, my study focused in the Western Hajr Mountains. Sideroxylon mascatense also grows in the Eastern Hajars, as well as down in Dhofar.
Okay.
But the main populations are focused in the Western Hajr Mountains.
And your study also, you're saying that this could be commercially viable if farmers actually focus on it and cultivate it.
Yes, there needs to be some research on proper cropping methods. With a lot of orchard fruit crops, blueberries, apples, you have different growth forms that produce more fruit. And so there could be some research to see which cropping system would produce the best, the most yield and the best fruit. There could be some research into that. There have been 2 propagation studies to date, and so it can be propagated. So the next step is cultivation studies and cropping methods.
So can this be considered a superfruit?
It has a high level of antioxidants in particular, and there's been numerous studies out of Pakistan on the purple fruiting variety, the one we know here as Būt, on the phytochemicals associated with it, to the neuroprotective pathways, and a bunch of other medicinal qualities of it. Anti-arthritic, anti-tumor, antifungal. It's got a lot of properties, but those have all been done on the purple fruiting type, the one we know here in Oman as Būt. To date, there have been no studies on this on the yellow-brown Hegimt fruiting type.
Okay, but you have done little bit, which is yet to be published, I understand.
Yes. As part of my PhD research, I did a mineral content study that compared the two.
Okay, so could you tell us the challenges the trees actually, because while you were surveying, you had to hike for 200 kilometers in 2 summers.
Yes, so I used I used a GIS software to randomly select points throughout the mountain range to select as random survey points. So I surveyed a total of 114 quadrats. Each quadrat was a 900 square meter plot, and then did a population census as well as associated plant community study on those plants. And so I tried to make it so each study quadrat point was no more than a 5-kilometer hike from a vehicle accessible point. And most of those stayed within that. There was a few a little longer, but for the most part, they stayed, 2 or 3 kilometer round trip.
But the challenge you found out is that you couldn't spot juvenile plants.
Yes, throughout the study, while hiking as well as in the quadrats themselves, there was zero recruitment. And so there's no rejuvenation going on. And so a population that has no rejuvenation is in decline. Also at the extremes of the habitat range, at the lower elevations and the higher elevations, there's a dying off of the mature specimens. It's flourishing though in the middle sections where there is adequate water for the plants.
So water could be the problem.
Water is definitely one of the problems. We've noticed declining declining precipitation rates in the Hajr Mountains over the last 30 years. There's been numerous studies that have pointed that out as well. And so yes, precipitation could be an issue. Also, there's been a slow increase in temperatures. There's been no studies to date on the flower and fruiting requirements of this plant. But in the Western Hajr Mountains, there's a lot of temperate fruit crops that are not producing their yields like they once did. And this is because of the increase in temperatures.
Okay. So one thing that was interesting is your observation on farmers adopting, the wild trees. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I've noticed many plantations and small little home plots while building, if there is an older mature specimen, they'll fence it off and irrigate it and care for it, which the plant thrives in these systems. So it produces quite a bit. One farmer I talked to said that they watered it once a week when needed during drought periods, and they would get up to 10 kilos off of it.
The fruits?
Throughout the year. Yes, of the fruit.
Okay. So you mean to say the future could see these crops or the shrubs actually cultivated commercially? It has to be the same territory because this is where they thrive naturally. Especially being a native plant, it could be tougher than any other plants that could be introduced. Plus, you think instead of just being sold to people who visit the mountains, it could be taken to commercial markets.
It absolutely could be marketed as the next fruit, superfruit. It's consumed fresh when in season, but it's also consumed dry as well. Really? And there is quite a bit of variety in the morphology of the fruit and the size and structure of it. So I found one specimen in the mountains that was up to almost 20 millimeters in diameter, and where a lot of the stuff that you will buy, if you buy from the children on the roadsides or in the markets, will be between 8 to 10 millimeters. And so within that variation, if we could start cultivating the best varieties that we can find and get good lineages for cultivated varieties for the farming, it definitely could be a marketable fruit crop.
The only challenge, though, is the propagation, because as you were mentioning, it has got enormous root system. So that would be difficult, do you think?
It wouldn't be the propagation. It produces quite a bit of viable seeds. And so seed germination is definitely possible. Tissue culture is definitely very easy and readily to do as well. So it's not the propagation, it's the cultivation. It's not one that would be likely to be uprooted and transplanted. And so similar to like what mangoes have, maybe you'd want a taller root zone, a taller pot to grow it in for the nursery setting. And then once it's transplanted, you don't want to be digging it up and trying to transplant it again.
Yes.
So you wouldn't be able to go to the wild per se, dig up a large specimen and transplant it into a farm situation. But
if you look at them, they look like they're coming out of the rocks. So they don't need much protection or pampering other than water, maybe?
Yes, the specimens that exist are quite pernicious. They're doing their best to stay alive. But at the same time, we're not seeing any new ones coming about. So a lot of these specimens are very old, 50, 100, maybe even hundreds of years old.
Oh, really?
You see them very, very old specimens in the mountains, similar to the olives, similar to the junipers. So with a lot of these larger shrub and tree species up in the mountains, we aren't seeing recruitment. We're not seeing new seedlings. So while they are producing viable offspring, they're not establishing themselves.
Why is that? That's very intriguing, though.
To say for sure, that would take another ecological study on its own. But quite possibly due to overgrazing. Also could be a recruitment cycle, a 50, 75-year recruitment cycle where we just haven't had the weather patterns to promote it. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. Those could be studies to actually narrow down the causes in the future.
Okay. But you definitely think it's a superfruit that we should be having in our local markets, at least to begin with, and even maybe in the future export.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Its health benefits are great.
Okay. Final question, what would the farmers need to do that?
They would need to be able to plant this. So we need to produce a good genetic lines of the plant for commercial cultivation. So propagating enough nursery stock to be able to sell to the farmers for the farmers to plant, and then some studies on proper cultivation methods. And the farmers themselves could help with this to see which type of canopy architecture would produce the most fruit, cultivation techniques, watering structure regimes, nutrient regimes, to produce the most fruit as well as the most nutritious fruit. As I mentioned to you earlier, drought-stressed plants tend to produce more fruit that is more has higher levels of nutritive properties. Like you drought-stressed tomatoes, and you can get more lycopenes. You can get a heavier mineral content. You can get more antioxidants, such like this. So heavily watering these plants in cultivation may produce a good fruit, but it also may produce lower levels of the nutrition properties.
Oh, that's true. Because you were also saying that when they are in the dry, arid areas, they have greater nutritional properties the way they are in the wild.
Yes. So comparing my rudimentary preliminary study on the mineral content compared to the studies published and out of Pakistan, where the mountains get a lot more rainfall than here, where this plant grows. The levels of the fruit from here is higher in antioxidants than those in the previous reports. Okay. And that could be just because of the more arid condition here.
True. So you never know, but we definitely need the juveniles and the smaller plants to come up. As you said, 100 years, 50 years. This is great treasure, actually.
Yes, it is. And it, like I said, it's definitely something that could be beneficial to the farmers with an ecosystem where right now they're struggling with some of the temperate fruit crops that they grow. They're not producing as much. The yields are down. And so having being able to fall back on a native plant or something that's a little bit stronger like this would be a viable option for them to continue their agriculture.
Perfect. And finally, I would like to know, you've been spending 8 years in Oman, 4 years in your master's at Sultan Qaboos University, now topped it with PhD. And you say you've had a great time?
Absolutely. I couldn't have done this without the support of my supervisor. Sultan Qaboos University has been just wonderful in giving me this opportunity to research. Yes, I did 2 years with a master's program here and 4 years now with my PhD. So my postgraduate career has been 6 years here, and it's just been an absolute wonderful opportunity that I can't thank Sultan Qaboos University and my supervisor, Dr. Rashid Al-Yahya, enough. It's just absolutely overwhelming.
Has it been also fun hiking the mountains?
I've seen much that most people would not get quite off the beaten path.
Anything interesting that you came across other than the trees themselves?
So many numerous beautiful flowers and other plants. as well as lizards and fox, you name it. The mountains are full of life. You don't notice how much life until you get up in them.
I can imagine. Well, I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Eric Hopkins. Thank you indeed for being here with us, and congratulations on your PhD and your findings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.